Hey everyone, John from Nintendo Life here, and since the beginning of time, around when dinosaurs strolled around the Earth, developers have been cramming in powerful games onto less powerful hardware, and I always love that. We've seen it a ton with the Switch, with games like Doom, and Doom Eternal, and Wolfenstein, and Rocket League, and so many more, but those are well documented. Today, I want to look at all of Nintendo's history and see some of the weirdest and most impressive games that have been ported to their consoles. Now, I'm only going to be pointing out 7 today, so if there's more that you want to discuss in the comments, by all means, go ahead and do that, but today, just these 7. Anyway, let's dive in and have a look at Resident Evil 2 on the N64. The primary reason the PlayStation won over the N64 was discs. Games could be cheaper and bigger and more explosive and more expansive. Because Nintendo stuck with cartridges, third parties like Square went on to make Final Fantasy VII exclusively for PlayStation. Nintendo lost a lot of support, and many games just didn't seem possible on the N64. That is why it's so impressive that Resident Evil 2 somehow squeezed its way in its entirety onto the cartridge with bonus features. For context, on PlayStation, Resident Evil 2 was on 2 different discs. Angel Studios somehow took that and squeezed onto a single 64MB cartridge. So we're talking the entire game with no cuts, Leon and Claire on the exact same cartridge, and then new stuff. You can change the color of blood, you can ditch tank controls and play with first-person controls, quite similar to the Resident Evil Remake re-release, and there's even features like surround sound, which other versions lacked. It certainly was compressed in areas, especially the FMVs, but for the most part, this was the better version to play. Everything is here. All the music, all the voice acting, all the rooms, nothing was cut. Resident Evil 2 64 remains one of the most impressive examples of compression in the entire industry. I can't even fathom how they pulled this one off. And perhaps on a lesser note, but still very impressive, is Resident Evil Deadly Silence on Nintendo DS. Not many people talk about this one, but in my opinion, this is easily the definitive version of vanilla Resident Evil. It's the base PlayStation game, complete with, the voice acting.
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right. Barry, thanks for saving my life.
But being a PlayStation game on the DS wasn't the only thing that made it impressive. Much like Resident Evil 2 on the N64, this improved upon the original. It has the quick turn from Resident Evil 3, you can skip door animations, which even the remake ports don't do that, and there's a bunch of quality of life improvements like a map on the screen at all times. This is simply the best playing version of the game, and it's not even close. It may not be as technically wowing as Resident Evil 2 64, but in either case, these two are incredible ports. The 3DS was home to a bunch of ports, including N64 games and GameCube games, but most impressively, Wii U games. Captain Toad Treasure Tracker was one of the most beautiful Wii U games, and they somehow took that and squeezed it onto 3DS. What's more, this still has stereoscopic 3D, and looking at these dioramas as if they were a box, kinda makes it feel like this game was made for 3DS. It still looks really good too, and of course the dual screen mechanics from Wii U translate perfectly to the 3DS. It's just fascinating how this game even exists. It came out the same time as the Switch version, and most eyes were on that one. Still, even if this version didn't sell particularly well, there's still a lot of merit in there. This lower poly Toad is adorable, and USK, what are you doing? Don't push him off the box! No, Toad, no! But there was another Wii U game in the form of Hyrule Warriors Legends. Now I'm capturing this on a base 3DS, and as you can see, it runs like Garbo. Now trust me, this plays a lot better on a new 3DS, but in terms of visual fidelity, it's definitely no Captain Toad. It made up for it though with quality of life improvements. Unlike the Wii U game, you can give characters orders and swap between them on the fly. There's even a new campaign with Linkle. There's a bunch of stuff in this version that wasn't on Wii U. However, the Switch version has Wii U visuals and all the 3DS content, so nowadays, absolutely play that one. But at the time, this may have been a bit ugly, but it was still the best playing version of Hyrule Warriors. But again, don't play on base 3DS. The performance was so bad that Fire Emblem Warriors was new 3DS exclusive, and yes, that game was also on 3DS. What a weird timeline. Dead Rising on 360 was the next-gen game. The amount of zombies on screen was a huge bragging point at the time, so how do you take that and put it on the Wii? Well, you try your gosh darn darndest. Dead Rising Chop Till You Drop is a very fitting name for this game because, well, they chopped until they dropped most of the identity of the game. What I find fascinating though isn't the low zombie count, but rather that this is a Resident Evil 4 asset flip. You probably noticed the cursor. That's from Resident Evil 4 Wii Edition, but it goes far beyond that. The guns, the animations, the reload animations, the sound effects, the menus, they're all from Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 4 is one of my favourite games of all time, so this is just fascinating to me. It's also very funny. The cutscenes are all from 360, so there's this shot where zombies are taking over the mall, and it's like, oh no, there's zombies everywhere! And then it cuts to gameplay. It's like, oh, where'd they go? They also got rid of the time limit, so there's no real urgency. It's a very strange port of the original Dead Rising. It takes out a bunch of unique mechanics, takes out the zombie count, and it's just kind of Resident Evil 4 in a mall with a weird structure. I don't think it's a particularly good game, but it's still one that's definitely worth playing. If you love RE4, then you're gonna at least be interested by this. Doom on the Super Nintendo. Now, depending who you ask, you'll probably get a different answer to whether this port is good or not. In terms of playability and frame rate, I mean, yeah, it's not great. It runs in the single digits sometimes, and when enemies are far away, it can be hard to tell if they're even there. But what's impressive is this even exists in the first place. Unlike other ports, this was based on the PC version. Maps aren't altered at all, so the geometry is pretty much the same as PC, whereas other ports are based on the Atari Jaguar version, so even releases that came out on more powerful hardware are simpler than Super Nintendo. This is also a 16-bit machine. The Mega Drive required a 32X to run this game. So yeah, it may run poorly, but this was still a high-end PC game running on a Super Nintendo. Many people couldn't afford a PC, so even if this was rough around the edges, it was still the most affordable way to play Doom. Of course, nowadays Panic Button have continued that legacy by bringing Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal to the Switch. They're both compromised too, but they're still a lot more playable than Doom on the Super Nintendo. All around, really impressive Doom ports. Okay, time for our final game, Donkey Kong Country. DKC was a visual powerhouse, and without any extra chips, the Super Nintendo looked like a next-gen machine. Why buy a 32X when the Super Nintendo has 3D games? Kinda. DKC of course used pre-rendered sprites, utilizing the same machines that made Jurassic Park. It was cutting-edge tech, and the result was really impressive. So I guess Rare's next question was, can we do this, but in 8-bit? The Donkey Kong Land games were more abridged versions of Country. The level designs are all original, but the themes and ideas are pretty much from the Super Nintendo game. But somewhere down the line, Rare ported the full-fledged Donkey Kong Country to the Game Boy Color. This pretty much has, beat for beat, the exact same level design. Everything here was made for a 16-bit machine, but it's running on a Game Boy. The Land games had a problem where everything's just kind of grayscale, so Donkey Kong blends in with the background, and that's pretty much fixed on the Game Boy Color. This is almost impossibly good looking for the Game Boy. Donkey and Diddy couldn't be on screen at the same time, but still, what they achieved here looks great. But it definitely could play better. The jumps just don't quite feel right, and that's especially emphasized by the minecart sections. I don't know how these pass testing, they just feel bad. The screen real estate is also a lot smaller, so things you were intended to see on the Super Nintendo aren't always in view on the Game Boy. You'll get hit by enemies you didn't even see coming, and that can be very frustrating. But still, Donkey Kong Country on the Game Boy Color, that is an achievement in itself. And Rare would redeem themselves even further on the Game Boy Advance. This is arguably the best playing version of DKC, though the colours do look quite weird. This was done with a bunch of early GBA games. They kind of washed out the colour palette to make things pop a bit more on the screen, without a backlight, but when you play this on a Game Boy Advance SP, or a DS, or a Game Boy Micro, or a Game Boy Player, it just doesn't look quite right. I'm afraid to say this, but DKC 3 is probably the best GBA port. I need a shower after saying that. So what's your favourite Impossible port, and was it featured in this video? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to go to that subscribe button and just squish it down until it's like a kilobyte in size. I don't know how big subscribe buttons are. Is a kilobyte around right? Should it be bigger? Should it be smaller? I don't know. But do that, and we'll see you next time. Bye everyone.